So I wanted to share a bit about my thoughts, not only on how I have radically flipped my outlook on how I perceive failure, but also on why we are defectively programmed with a wrong understanding of its value. Failure is considered itself a bad thing. I mean, who wants to fail, right? By the very definition, it means you weren't successful at something. But what's worse, oftentimes, is our feel of failure and not even the failure itself. Most of us have linked our failures in direct proportion to the worthiness as a person. Think about it. If we succeed at something, we view ourselves in a more positive light. We generally feel better about ourselves. Okay? Think about some of the accomplishments that you've done. But on the other hand of the spectrum, we generally experience more feelings of inferiority when we fail. However, let's consider this. If failure in fact teaches you something and you learn from that process, is it entirely a bad thing? What if that failure brings you closer to your dream or your success? As one quote accurately states, failure is not the opposite of success, but a part of success. I love Thomas Edison's response to a reporter that asked, "How did it feel to fail 1,000 times?" Edison replied, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps." I love it. Rather than it just being a cute quote or nice saying, what if we really believe that? Imagine how much impact it would have on our lives if we embraced the learning process of our failures and looked at them as steps rather than as a deduction against our value as a person. In general, I've observed that successful artists, entrepreneurs, writers, and highly influential people have learned this valuable principle that to fail does not mean they are a failure, but just another obstacle along their journey to success. But I really was curious as to what may be the cause of our erroneous programming to begin with. What reasons have caused us to be so resistant of the process of failing and sap from us a piece of our self-esteem every time we do? The clues of the source leaped out to me when my wife and I actually attended an 8-week class entitled Loving Your Kids on Purpose. Great class, and I recommend every parent to read the book or get the audio. One of the key points that stood out so clearly was the principle of giving your children room to learn through their mistakes. What a concept! We discovered that from an early age, kids learn so much more quickly by exposing them to their consequences rather than through parental mandates. For example, if it's cold outside, instead of reminding your son every single time for 100 times over that he needs his coat before going out, you allow him to discover for himself why he actually needs that coat. What this looks like is actually allowing Johnny to follow through his going out without reminding him that he needs his jacket or coat. Does he die of pneumonia? No. Actually, just within a few minutes, Johnny comes bounding in and exclaims emphatically to Mama, "Hey, it's cold. I need my coat." And then proceeds to bound right back out. Miraculously, Mom never has to remind Johnny again of his coat. Okay? Another example was a mother that constantly had to remind her daughter not to forget her lunch when heading off to school. Even the times Mom forgot to remind Sandy to bring her lunch with her, Mom, since she is loving and motherly, would still deliver the lunch to school for her. One day, after being armed with these new tactics, she tried a different approach and bit her lip in reminding her daughter this time to grab her lunchbox. Sure enough, Sandy forgot her lunch. And just as the other days passed when she would forget, she'd call their mom and ask her, "Hey Mom, can you bring my lunch? I forgot it." But not this day, said the mom. She went one school day without lunch. But guess what? From that day forward, her daughter never forgot her lunch ever again. Ever. The common theme here is that when parents are allowed room for the children to learn through the consequences of their failures in a controlled environment, they actually learned it one time and didn't need to learn it again. This is in stark contrast to simply relying on emotional manipulation of the parents, who resort to simply barking orders that never seem to sink in. You see, the only motivation in fulfilling the parents' wishes in this case is to please the parents. Think of the scenario with Johnny and his coat and Sandy with her lunch. There was no learning. or failing, but just parent pleasing by doing what they were told and told and told again. This leads us to another point. Guess where the origins of those of us that find ourselves being enslaved by pleasing other people around us? How many of us are simply doing things to make other people happy and not because it really is what we want to do or is what is real success? Then think about all the stages of our childhood where we are not allowed to fail. We're not allowed to fail at school. Parents, you're not allowed to get B's or C's or D's. Sports. Think about social settings. Think about the guy or girl you had a crush on but never had the guts to ask because you were scared of what? Being rejected. Failure. So, as you can observe, our rejection through the process of failure is embedded within us often from the techniques utilized by our parents. No fault to our parents, as we often are influenced to parent the same way we were parented, if we know no better. Now, there is a two-pronged lesson here. First of all, failing doesn't mean you are a failure. Failing can be a step forward if we learn from it. Now you know one more way not to do something, right? And as I've heard one friend say it, it's failing forward. Instead of our failures being a roof that contains us in our safe place, let them be giant steps that allow you to bound to the tops of mountains. If your failures are small and few, then you probably aren't dreaming big enough. The second part of this lesson I think I've learned is now go and take a flyer on the Loving Your Kids on Purpose information. Break the trend and allow your kids space to learn from an early age that mistakes are just a part of learning and not to be inhibited by the fears of those failures that cage in their hopes and dreams.